My sister destroyed my life, all in her quest for perfection. She even tried to steal the $50,000 inheritance Grandma left me by filing for conservatorship. Tessa and I were polar opposites, like the sun and moon, and it often brought out the worst in us. Growing up, she was the Stratus student while I was a B-average kid. My parents constantly wondered why I couldn't be more like Tessa. By our senior year, the gap between us was undeniable. Tessa had just landed an incredible marketing internship at a top-tier downtown firm, and my parents threw her a huge party. A month later, when I got into art school, my dad questioned if I'd thought about a more stable path like Tessa's. 3 weeks into her internship, Tessa showed up in my room at 2 a.m. I knew something was terribly wrong. She never came to my side of the house. Her mascara was smeared and she was sobbing, repeating, "I messed up so bad." Turned out she'd maxed out Mom's emergency credit card, spending $3,200 on work clothes. My jaw dropped when she said the amount. "Everyone there dresses like they're from a fashion magazine," she explained, grabbing my hands. I didn't realize I just wanted to fit in. "Rowan, please, you have to help me." I just stared, confused. "Just tell Mom the truth," I said. "She'll understand." Tessa let out a bitter laugh. "Are you kidding? She'll make me quit. She'll say I'm not ready for the real world." Then she said the words that sealed my fate. "You have to say it was you. Mom already thinks you blow money on your goth clothes. She'll believe it, and she won't punish you as hard because—" She trailed off, but I knew exactly what she meant. Mom had always expected me to mess up, so I did it. I took the blame. The next morning, while Tessa was conveniently at her internship, Mom found the charges. I stood there as Mom cut up the credit card and lectured me about how gothic accessories don't make you special. The next day, I started working at a coffee shop, and soon added night shifts at a gas station. My life became a blur of 50-hour work weeks and studying math. Meanwhile, Tessa would come home bragging about client dinners, wearing the new luxury outfits I'd paid for. The worst part was watching her transform. After being promoted to junior coordinator, she'd say things like, "This whole thing was probably good for you, Rowan. Finally learning financial responsibility." 6 months later, when I asked if she'd pay me back, she told me to thank her for the life lesson. Fast forward 3 years. Our whole extended family was gathered for Thanksgiving, and I'd recently mentioned taking out loans for grad school. Tessa's eyes gleamed with that familiar predatory look. She launched into a loud lecture about financial responsibility, making sure everyone at the table heard. She painted a vivid picture of my supposed $3,200 gothic shopping spree, how Mom and Dad had to teach me a terrible lesson, and how I worked all those awful hours to pay off my irresponsible debt. Something inside me finally snapped. 3 years of silence. 3 years of being the family disappointment, while she played the perfect daughter in clothes I paid for. "Actually," I heard myself say, "since we're sharing financial wisdom, why don't you tell everyone what that money really bought?" The table went silent. Tessa's smile froze as I pulled out my phone and explained how working retail taught me to keep receipts. I detailed every designer purchase she'd made: the Diane von Furstenberg dress, Jimmy Choo heels, her entire professional wardrobe she was so proud of. All bought on May 15, 2019, 3 weeks into her internship. The room was hushed as I laid out the true story, how she begged me to take the fall, how I worked 50 hours a week my senior year, missing my own art show to cover shifts, and falling asleep at graduation from sheer exhaustion. All while she got promoted in clothes I had paid for. Mom's fork clattered onto her plate. Tessa opened and closed her mouth like a fish, struggling to form words. When she finally stammered something about me needing to learn a lesson, I completely lost it. I told everyone about my constant sleep deprivation, doing homework at gas stations, and watching my sister climb the corporate ladder in heels, bought with my minimum wage earnings. Uncle Richard, who'd toasted Tessa as the accomplished niece, just an hour before, sat transfixed. Aunt Janine stared at Tessa as if seeing her for the first time. The golden child image was crumbling in real time. "My God," Mom whispered, staring at Tessa. "We punished Rowan for months. We made her pay back every penny while you... Her voice broke. I scoffed, looking at my parents, both in tears. Too little, too late. The next morning, I woke up to 47 missed calls. My art school acceptance had been revoked after an anonymous tip about academic dishonesty. My phone kept buzzing. With trembling hands, I scrolled through messages from art school admissions, my portfolio advisor, and the dean's office. Each one was more urgent than the last. I stumbled out of bed, nearly tripping over yesterday's clothes. My hands shook as I called the admissions office. The hold music, a cheerful piano tune, felt like it was mocking me for 7 minutes, while my future crumbled. When the admissions officer finally spoke, her tone was carefully neutral. Someone had sent them evidence of plagiarism in my portfolio. Screenshots from my Instagram altered to show earlier timestamps than my submitted work. They'd received everything at 6:47 a.m., including a detailed analysis of how I supposedly stole designs from several artists. My phone vibrated during the call. A text from Tessa popped up. My stomach dropped when I read it. She'd written about financial responsibility, securing my work, and password protection for online storage. The shrug emoji at the end made my blood boil. But as I tried to screenshot her confession, my screen went black, flickered, then went dark again. I remembered, back in 2019, when Tessa's phone died. She borrowed mine for 20 minutes to call Mom. She'd also said she needed to check things for work. I'd been too exhausted from double shifts to think anything of it. The admissions officer was still explaining their process when Mom called. I hung up with the school and answered already. Knowing what was coming, Mom launched into an attack before I could speak. How could you humiliate Tessa on Thanksgiving after everything we've done for you? Tessa had called her crying that morning, distraught by my rudeness, and I needed to apologize immediately. I tried to explain about the art school and Tessa's text, but Mom cut me off. This is just like you, she went on, always making everything about yourself, always playing the victim. After she hung up, I rushed to my laptop. My hand shook as I typed my Google password. Invalid. I tried again. Invalid. Password reset. The recovery email had been changed. Security concerns, it said. When had I given Tessa access to fix my security? Oh, right. Immediately after the credit card incident, she'd insisted on helping me set up two-factor authentication. The doorbell rang downstairs. Through my window, I saw Tessa's car pull into our parents' driveway. She emerged with a tray of coffees and a pink bakery box, playing the perfect daughter as my life imploded. My phone rang again. My coffee shop manager's voice was tight, his anger barely contained. Someone had complained I was stealing tips. Anonymous, of course, but incredibly detailed. They knew exact shifts and amounts. I needed to come in immediately to discuss my job. I looked at my phone after he hung up. The coffee shop was 20 minutes away. The art school dean would be in. His office in 30. I couldn't be in two places. I chose the school. The coffee shop was just for money. Art school was everything I'd worked for. When I called back to explain, it was too late. He'd already made his decision. 3 years of perfect attendance, glowing reviews, and customer praise meant nothing against an anonymous complaint. I'll bother coming in for your last check, he said. We'll mail it. I sat on my bed, still in yesterday's clothes, watching Tessa hug our parents in the kitchen below through the window. The heartbroken sister, now in a soft pink sweater and messy bun, sought solace from her family. My phone lit up with an Instagram notification. Tessa had shared a story. I clicked before I could stop myself. It was a selfie with our parents, coffee mugs raised. The caption read, "Healing begins with the truth." In the background, barely visible on the kitchen counter, was a familiar piece of fabric. The Diane von Furstenberg dress I'd paid for with 3 weeks of double shifts. The dean's office called while I was still staring at the photo. The evidence against me was extensive. Videos compiled from my Instagram stories showed me working. With audio spliced in from somewhere else, me talking about drawing inspiration from established artists, timestamps on these videos indicated they predated my portfolio submission by months. But I recognized my own voice in the audio. Conversations with Tessa from years ago, recorded without my knowledge. Discussions about my artistic process, but completely out of context. She had been collecting evidence for years. My best friend, Kara, called next. Tessa had contacted Kara's boyfriend, expressing concerns about my mental health. Screenshots of messages I supposedly sent, discussing dark thoughts. Kara asked if I was okay, but her tone lacked warmth. Doubt crept in. I threw on some clothes and called an Uber to campus. I spent 20 minutes in traffic, refreshing my email, watching my future vanish in real time. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror as I muttered to myself, trying to piece together how many times Tessa had infiltrated my life. The art building looked different, smaller, as if it had already rejected me. I rushed up 3 flights to Professor Lennox's office. He usually kept my physical portfolio there, saying he enjoyed showing it to other faculty. The office door was open. Professor Lennox sat at his desk, my portfolio spread out. Several pages were missing, including the ones that best showcased my artistic development and unique style. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. He explained the previous night's security footage had been altered. But the janitor reported seeing someone, a nice blonde lady, claiming to be my sister, picking something up I'd supposedly left behind. My phone vibrated. Tessa again. This time about my gas station job. She'd already called that boss, expressing concerns about my Thanksgiving confession and my history of financial responsibility. I sank into the chair across from Professor Lennox. 3 years of work lay scattered across his desk, riddled with huge gaps. The remaining pieces were fragmented and amateurish, missing the context of the lost pages. My roommate texted as I sat there. She'd received emails about my stealing history, anonymous, but detailed. She wanted to talk about our living situation. "The trust is gone," she wrote. "Can I start looking somewhere else?" I launched my password management app, desperate to access my accounts. The most recent login showed Tessa's device 3 days ago. Then I remembered how insistent she'd been about helping me manage my passwords. The night she borrowed my phone in 2019, saying I needed more security, I'd given her my master password for emergencies. My phone screen went black again. This time, it stayed dark for 30 seconds before flickering back on. A chilling reminder that Tessa could see everything I did. The gas station manager called while I was still in Professor Lennox's office. Tessa had shown up in person, he explained, acting like a worried sister. She'd brought copies of my Thanksgiving confession. He appreciated her looking out for me, but he couldn't have someone with an admitted thievery past handling cash. 2 jobs, gone in one morning. My savings would last about 2 months if I was careful, even less if I had to find a new place. I walked back outside, squinting in the morning sun. My Uber driver was long gone. I'd have to take the bus home. While waiting at the bus stop, I saw something in my email. Legal document filed 2 days before Thanksgiving. Tessa had petitioned to become my financial guardian, citing a history of irresponsible behavior that required intervention. She'd been planning this before Thanksgiving, before I'd even mentioned the dress. The 40-minute bus ride home was spent mentally reconstructing the timeline, every loaned phone, every helpful security fix, every recorded conversation. Years of preparation had led to this moment. Tessa's car was gone by the time I got home, but the damage was already done. Mom barely acknowledged me when I walked in. Dad mumbled something about disappointment and went back to his studies. I climbed the stairs to my room, each step heavier than the last. My laptop was open on my desk. Google still denied me access. My phone vibrated with another text. It was my roommate again. She wanted me out by the end of the week, stared at my reflection in the black phone screen. 3 years ago, I was the girl who took the fall to protect her sister. Now I was the girl who'd lost everything because I finally spoke the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tessa had taught me about financial responsibility after all. She'd shown me the true cost of trust and family loyalty. The lesson just took 3 years to sink in. My phone buzzed again, an email from the art school. They'd be conducting a formal review, but I should consider my admission void. They took academic integrity extremely seriously. I sat on my bed in the exact spot where Tessa had cried 3 years prior. No tears fell, just a hollow feeling that this was only the beginning. Tessa had 3 years to plan. I'd had one dinner. The game was already decided. I packed everything. I could into 2 suitcases, while my parents stayed downstairs, acting like I didn't exist. My roommate's eviction notice left me no choice but to return to a place I was no longer welcome. My hands moved mindlessly, folding clothes, while my mind replayed Tessa's calculated destruction of my life. The doorbell rang. I saw a process server handing Dad papers. His face went pale as he read them. Within minutes, both parents were at my door. Mom clutched a restraining order petition, her hands shaking. Tessa had filed it that morning, citing my increased harassment and the scary confrontation on Thanksgiving. Dad's voice was cold as he stated, I couldn't stay if Tessa felt frightened visiting. They'd already met with their lawyer. I had 24 hours to find somewhere else, or they'd formally evict me to comply with the potential ruling. I called Aunt Janine, swallowing my pride. She listened to my explanation, then sighed. She had a spare room, but only if I recognized my mistakes and agreed to therapy for my jealousy issues. Tessa had already called her, crying about my obsession with her success. My phone vibrated. The gas station manager had reconsidered. He'd let me work one last shift tonight to pick up my things and final check. I agreed, desperate for any money. That evening, I worked my last shift in a haze. Regular customers avoided eye contact. Word had spread about my theft confession from Thanksgiving. Tessa's version of events was already widely accepted as truth. During my break, I saw Tessa's latest post. She'd complained in our neighborhood Facebook group about feeling afraid after my public attack. The comments were brutal. People I'd known for years called me unstable, said I needed help, and praised Tessa for her courage in speaking out. My phone screen flickered black again. When it came back, my Instagram account was deactivated. The password had changed. Years of work, my entire digital art portfolio, gone. Tessa was erasing me bit by bit. When I got back to my parents' house around midnight, my belongings were already packed in boxes by the front door. A note from Mom said they'd paid for week at a nearby motel till you figure things out. It read, number, signature. The motel room reeked of cigarettes and disappointment. I sat on the thin mattress, laptop open, trying to access any of my accounts. Everything was locked. Then I remembered something. My old tablet from freshman year, before I upgraded. It might still be logged into my cloud storage, from before Tessa's security intervention. I drove to the storage unit, where I'd put my college things. My hands fumbled with the latch in the dark. Inside, buried among art supplies, I found the iPad dead battery. So I sat in my car, charging it from the cigarette lighter, praying it would power on and still be logged in. My heart pounded as I accessed my cloud storage, downloading everything I could before Tessa noticed the security flaw. Portfolio pieces, images, documents all transferred onto a USB stick I bought at a gas station. My phone rang. The name Wes Calder was unfamiliar. He identified himself as a former intern at Tessa's company. I was fired 6 months ago for misusing company funds, he said. He'd seen my Facebook post about Thanksgiving. He had information about Tessa, but we needed to meet in person. The next morning, I met Wes at a diner 2 towns away. He looked exhausted, working 3 jobs since Tessa had ruined his career. He showed me emails, receipts, documents. Tessa had charged personal purchases to the company card, then blamed him when accounting noticed. She'd convinced everyone he was a thief, got him fired, and destroyed his references. Wes had saved everything, hoping to clear his name someday. Ghost. The receipts showed Tessa's shopping habits and signatures, but his NDA prevented him from using them in court. He could give them to me, but I couldn't use them legally. I recorded our conversation on my phone using the same tactics Tessa had taught me. Wes described Tessa manipulating their employer, playing the victim, and crying in meetings about feeling targeted by the intern who uncovered her stealing. After Wes left, I sat in my car, processing. Tessa had done this before. Wasn't special. I was just her latest victim. My phone vibrated. A text from Emily, Tessa's roommate, sent at 2 a.m. She was drunk and felt guilty. Tessa had laughed about the goth phase financial education she'd given me, but there was more. Emily mentioned a girl named Jade, whom Tessa had taught a lesson in college. Emily's next text came quickly after. Tessa had seen the messages. Emily retracted everything, said I was harassing her. The text ended, "She made me send this." I drove to the courthouse to submit my response to the restraining order. As I handed in my handwritten declaration, the clerk gave me a sympathetic, "Look, I couldn't afford an attorney." Tessa had hired one of the city's top firms. Outside the courthouse, I Googled Tessa's college roommate, Jade Summers. I found her on LinkedIn. She was a teacher 3 states away. Her Facebook was locked down, but I found an old college newspaper article. Jade had been expelled for academic dishonesty in junior year, lost her scholarship, and never graduated. The details were vague, but the timing aligned with Tessa needing a single room. I messaged Jade on LinkedIn, explaining who I was. She replied within an hour. She couldn't help. Tessa had shattered her college dreams. She'd rebuilt her life and couldn't go through it again. But she confirmed my suspicions. Tessa had faked evidence, fabricated reports, and ruined Jade's future over a petty roommate dispute. The restraining order hearing was in 3 days. I spent them living in my van, showering at the gym, and applying for jobs using coffee shop Wi-Fi. Every application asked about criminal history. I didn't have one yet, but Tessa was working on it. Professor Lennox, my former art professor, texted, asking to meet. He'd found my 2018 sketches in his office, proving the originality of my portfolio. But when Tessa realized he was helping me, she went to his office. The security footage from her visit was strangely corrupted. Then Lennox demanded an immediate transfer to another college. He handed me the sketches and an audio recording of Tessa threatening his career if he wrote me a recommendation letter. The evidence piled up, but none of it was admissible. Everything I'd gathered involved breaking rules Tessa could use as proof of harassment. She'd prepared for this, capitalizing on my desperation, making me careless. Tessa arrived at the restraining order hearing in a conservative suit, looking fragile. She'd brought character witnesses from work, printouts of my threatening social media messages, and proof of my break-in to retrieve my tablet from storage. She cried as she recounted living in fear since Thanksgiving. I represented myself, my voice cracking as I tried to explain the methodical destruction of my life. The judge seemed skeptical. "Where's your evidence? Why didn't you report the alleged harassment sooner? You have any witnesses?" Tessa's lawyer presented their final piece of evidence, security footage from her office building, showing me waiting outside, looking threatening. The tape didn't show I was there for a job interview at another company in the same building. But context seemed irrelevant. The image was damning. The judge issued a temporary restraining order. I couldn't get within 500 feet of Tessa, her home, or her business. The building where I'd interviewed was now off limits. Another door slammed. Shut. I checked my bank balance as I walked out of the courthouse. $300 left. My motel week was almost up. Car insurance was due tomorrow. Then I saw it. I almost missed a legal notice in my spam folder. Tessa had applied for conservatorship, claiming I was mentally unstable and incapable of managing my finances. The hearing was set for next week. She won. She'd have control over everything I owned. I drove to the library to research conservatorship law. That's when it clicked. Tessa's filing mentioned protecting family assets. What family assets? We weren't rich. Our parents lived paycheck to paycheck. I called my cousin Eli, the lawyer who handled Grandma's estate 2 years ago. He was hesitant to talk until I mentioned the conservatorship. He revealed Grandma's will included a $50,000 trust fund for the grandchild who needed it most, accessible at age 25. I turned 25 next month. Eli couldn't say more. Tessa's boss was his firm's biggest client, but he suggested I look up the will. It was public record. At the courthouse, I found Grandma's will, $50,000. In trust for the grandchild with the greatest need at age 25, the trustee would decide. And the trustee was the person with legal guardianship or conservatorship. Tessa knew. She'd been planning this for years, waiting for me to turn 25, the credit card incident, security help, the recorded conversations all groundwork for this moment. I sat in my car, engine off to save gas, piecing it together. Tessa needed me to look unstable, irresponsible, incapable. My Thanksgiving confession had been a huge mistake, giving her the opening she needed. Now she was moving fast. Before I turned 25 and got access to the trust myself, my phone rang, an unknown number. It was the art school dean. They'd finished their review. While they found no proof of actual plagiarism, the reputational implications of my situation made my acceptance impossible. They wished me luck with my future endeavors. I drove to Tessa's apartment building, not to confront her the restraining order forbade it, but to think. To sit where she'd shattered my life and plan my next move. That's when I saw Wes's car in guest parking. He was at Tessa's building. As I watched, he entered with a key code. Tessa had no idea what he looked like because she hadn't visited Tessa. He was visiting someone else. I messaged him. He replied. Instantly, was dating a girl in 4B. I'd spent months learning the building's routines. He knew Tessa's habits and weaknesses. We met at a park outside the restraining order's radius. Wes had been watching, waiting for his chance at justice. He'd seen Tessa bring home boxes of work files she wasn't allowed to remove from the office. He'd caught her using the company car for personal errands. Small infractions, but they added up. More importantly, he'd stayed in touch with other former employees. 3 others shared similar stories. Tessa's pattern of professional exploitation went back years, but everyone was too scared to speak up. She'd ruined their careers and reputations. I made a decision. If I was going down, I'd document everything. The time for court had passed. This was for the truth. I created a blog, anonymous but detailed. Every piece of evidence, every relationship, every pattern. Wes contributed his files. Others slowly started sharing their stories. Tessa found the blog within days. Her lawyer sent a cease and desist letter to the hosting company. But I'd learned from Tessa herself about backups, mirror sites, and storing everything. The truth was harder to erase than she'd expected. The conservatorship hearing arrived. Tessa showed up with paperwork detailing my mental illness, job, losses, eviction, restraining order, and art school rejection. On paper, I looked exactly as unstable as she'd painted me. But I'd prepared. I requested a psychiatric evaluation from a court-approved psychiatrist. It would take 3 days, postponing the hearing. Tessa's lawyer objected, but the judge agreed. If I was truly unstable, an evaluation would show it. The 3 days of mental evaluation were surreal. I told the truth about everything. The doctor listened, took notes, asked questions. Tessa had already called the facility, expressing concern for my well-being, but the doctor saw right through it. The evaluation concluded I had no mental illnesses, only an acute stress reaction to family conflict. It wasn't enough to end the conservatorship, but it bought me time. The court scheduled a second hearing in 2 weeks to review the findings. I used those 2 weeks wisely. I found Jade through a teaching forum. She refused to testify, but she did write a letter explaining Tessa's behavior. I connected with 2 former co-workers of Tessa's who'd been forced to resign. They wouldn't testify either, but their written statements were consistent. The blog grew. Others found it, sharing their own experiences with workplace bullying, family manipulation, and financial abuse. Tessa tried multiple times to have it taken down, but I'd figured out her strategy. Stay within legal limits. Document everything. Let the truth speak for itself. 5 days before the conservatorship hearing, Tessa slipped up.
Oh?
She wore the Diane von Furstenberg dress in an Instagram post, commenting about supporting her family during their mental health struggles. It was the same dress from her Thanksgiving post. Wes took a screenshot before she could delete it. I'd been living in my van for 2 weeks, showering at the gym, picking up odd jobs through apps. Rock bottom felt like freedom. Tessa had taken everything she could. There was nothing left to lose. The night before the hearing, I parked outside the storage facility to review my evidence. Though inadmissible in court, it painted a clear picture of Tessa's long-standing pattern of destruction. With multiple victims, the trust fund motive, the calculated timing, My phone vibrated. Mom, she'd finally reached out. She'd seen the blog, read the stories, and was starting to recognize the pattern she'd missed for years. She apologized, but what could she do? Lawyers were involved. The damage was done. I told her about the $50,000 trust fund Tessa was trying to steal. I went silent. She didn't know. Dad didn't know. Tessa had kept it a secret while planning her final move. The conservatorship hearing would decide everything. If Tessa won, she'd have complete control over my finances, future, and personal life. She'd manage the trust fund for my benefit. If I won, I'd still be unemployed, homeless, and with a ruined reputation, but I'd be free. I spent the last night in my car writing, not for the blog, but for myself. Every moment, every choice, every outcome, wanted a record of the truth. Whether I won or lost tomorrow, as morning broke in the parking lot, I prepared for court. I showered at the gym one last time, put on my single clean outfit. I gathered my inadmissible evidence, my psychological evaluation, and the written testimonies of Tessa's other victims. The hearing started at 9 a.m. Tessa would look polished and prepared, flanked by expensive lawyers. I'd arrive alone, armed, only with the information Mom had spent years teaching me to document. I'd assumed the score was settled weeks ago, but I was wrong. The game was still on, and Tessa had trained me well. Financial responsibility. As the sun climbed higher, I drove toward the courthouse. My evidence USB drive was in one pocket, Wes's recordings in the other. 3 years of preparation on her end, 3 weeks of frantic paperwork on mine. The final lesson was about to begin. The courthouse parking lot was already packed when I arrived. I circled 3 times before finding a spot in the back. My hands left sweaty marks on the steering wheel as I gathered my evidence folders. Through the glass doors, I saw Tessa's lawyers setting up at the plaintiff's table. Tessa was still missing. The security line moved slowly. I noticed the clock was past 8:45. The guards scrutinized my USB drive suspiciously before letting me through. The metal detector beeped at Wes's recordings in my pocket, but they let me keep them after a thorough check. Tessa entered the courtroom at 8:55 a.m. in a navy suit, probably more expensive than my car. She had 3 character witnesses from her company. Her attorney had a stack of paperwork thick enough to block a door. I sat alone at the defendant's table, clutching my single folder and a court-appointed advocate I'd met 5 minutes earlier. At precisely 9 a.m., the judge entered. Judge Catherine Chen, her nameplate read. She reviewed the conservatorship petition while I sized up Tessa's witnesses, her supervisor, the HR director, and someone I didn't recognize. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a business catalog. Tessa's lawyer began, detailing my pattern of instability, job losses, eviction, restraining order, art school rejection. Every point supported by documentation. My advocate objected twice. Both times overruled. When they presented the psychological evaluation, Tessa's lawyer cleverly twisted it. My acute stress reaction proved my inability to handle adult responsibilities. The doctor's notes on family conflicts showed I couldn't form relationships. Even my clarity during the evaluation became a concerning detachment from reality. Tessa took the stand next. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue as she recounted finding me in her apartment. Her voice cracked as she spoke of living in fear since Thanksgiving. She brought up Grandma's trust fund as an afterthought, claiming she'd only recently discovered it while checking family paperwork out of concern for my future. The judge asked about the timeline. Tessa revealed she'd filed the conservatorship petition before Thanksgiving, claiming she'd been concerned about my spending patterns for months. She stated my disclosure at dinner confirmed her darkest fears. About my financial irresponsibility, my advocate conducted a weak cross-examination. Tessa had an answer for everything. Yes, she helped me with passwords in 2019, but only because I asked. No, she never accessed my accounts without authorization. Remote access app. She knew nothing about it. Perhaps I installed it myself and forgot, she suggested. During the lunch break, I sat in my car, reviewing my evidence. Wes had texted, offering to testify, but we both knew his NDA prevented it. Jade Summers had sent another message reiterating she couldn't get involved. Even Professor Lennox had gone silent after his relocation. The afternoon session focused on my current situation: living in my car, no steady job, a nearly empty bank account. Tessa's lawyer painted a picture of me on the verge of catastrophic devastation if no action was taken. Then came the witnesses. Tessa's boss vouched for her exceptional character and family concern. The HR director confirmed Tessa's concerns about me months ago. The third witness was a therapist Tessa had seen about helping a troubled family member. My turn came at 3 p.m. My advocate had told me to keep my responses brief and factual. I tried to explain the 2019 incident, but without the receipts. I'd shown at Thanksgiving, it sounded like deflection. He mentioned Wes Calder, but couldn't produce his evidence. I brought up Jade Summers, but she'd refused to help. The judge asked about my evidence folder. I talked about the blog, the patterns I'd uncovered, and the other victims who'd come forward. Tessa's lawyer objected to unsubstantiated internet rumors. The judge ruled nothing from the blog could be considered. I pulled out the USB drive, the altered Instagram videos, and the timestamp analysis I'd done. The judge briefly looked them over before Tessa's lawyer argued I lacked the technical expertise to support my claims. Without an expert witness, my analysis was meaningless. Next came the audio tape from Professor Lennox, Tessa, threatening his career if he helped me. But the recording was made without Tessa's consent in a two-party consent state. Inadmissible. My advocate had no idea I had it. By 4 p.m., I was drowning. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered hit a legal wall. Tessa had spent years planning for this moment. I'd had 3 weeks of desperate scrambling. The judge called a brief recess. In the bathroom, I splashed water on my face, staring at my reflection, dark circles under my eyes, hair I'd chopped myself to save money. I was wearing the same black jacket from Thanksgiving, my only court-appropriate outfit now. Tessa's lawyer delivered their closing argument. I was a young woman in distress, unable to handle basic life tasks. The job losses, homelessness, and neurotic preoccupation with Tessa all indicated I needed help. The trust fund would provide resources for my care, with Tessa properly overseeing its usage. My advocate tried her best. She pointed out I'd held jobs for years before the recent incidents. My psychological evaluation showed no mental illness. The timing of Tessa's petition seemed odd, but without proof of Tessa's manipulation, everything sounded flimsy. Judge Chen deliberated for 20 minutes. When she returned, her expression was neutral. She agreed the matter was complicated, as many family disputes are. However, the facts clearly showed my situation was deteriorating and required assistance. The conservatorship was granted for a year, with a mandatory review after 6 months. Tessa would manage my finances, including any inheritance or trust money. I was expected to maintain stable housing and work. Weekly therapy sessions were mandatory. Any breach would extend the conservatorship. Tessa's emotions seemed genuine. When the judge delivered her decision, Tessa approached me, reaching out. As if for a hug, I stepped back, bumping into the table. She murmured something about wanting to help. My advocate led me away. Outside the courthouse, I sat on the stairs, trying to comprehend what had just happened. My phone vibrated with the formal order. Tessa now had complete authority over my bank accounts, credit, any money I earned, and the trust fund I'd access. In 3 weeks, when I turned 25, Mom called while I was still sitting there. She'd watched the proceedings from the gallery. Her voice was deliberate, measured. She urged me to come home and follow the court's orders. Let Tessa help you get back on your feet. The same enabling pattern that caused this problem. I drove to the storage facility one last time. Tessa would soon inventory my belongings and decide what I could keep. I sat among my college things, my painting tools, the relics of the life she'd systematically destroyed. The tablet I used for my portfolio was there. I slipped it inside my jacket. One small act of defiance. That night, I parked behind a 24-hour grocery store, using their Wi-Fi to update the blog one last time. I posted the court's verdict, the truth about the trust fund, and the years of planning that led to this. Within an hour, Tessa's lawyer issued another cease and desist. The hosting company removed the site, but the internet remembers. Others had archived the posts. Screenshots of financial abuse and toxic families were shared in online forums. Tessa couldn't erase everything, even though she'd won what mattered most. The next morning, I went to Tessa's apartment building. Not to violate the restraining order, but to see Wes one last time. He was leaving, starting fresh in another city where Tessa's influence couldn't reach. He offered to help me leave too, but I had court-mandated therapy. The therapist's office was in a strip mall, next to a nail salon and a tax office. Dr. Catherine Roberts, the door read. Of course, Tessa had chosen her. The first session focused on my Tessa-related persecution complex. I sat mostly in silence, knowing anything I said would be reported back. Tessa had secured a job for me at a call center, minimum wage, regulated hours, direct deposits into an account she controlled. She also found me a room in a boarding house, with a shared bathroom and no kitchen, which met the stable housing requirement. My new routine began immediately. Thursdays work at 8 a.m., therapy at 5 p.m. Tessa inspected my purchases weekly, scrutinizing every penny. She gave me $50 a week for food and miscellaneous expenses. The rest went to repaying bills I'd never accumulated. 3 weeks later, I turned 25. The trust fund was automatically deposited into the conservatorship account. I couldn't touch the $50,000. Tessa texted me about investing responsibly for my future. I didn't reply. I'd realized silence was my only form of resistance. Wes sent an email from his new city. He'd found a job and was starting over. The other? Victims from the blog stayed in discreet contact. Couldn't legally help each other, but knowing we weren't alone was a comfort. After 2 months at work, I was promoted to Employee of the Month. Tessa received a $100 bonus as part of her acknowledgement. She texted me congrats and a reminder about financial responsibility. The same sentence that had started everything. The boarding house was full of people like me, broken by circumstances, starting over. We didn't say much, but we understood each other. Everyone was running from something or someone. Art supplies remained in storage. Tessa had deemed them non-essential and sold most of them. She kept the portfolio pieces as evidence of my progress under her care. During lunch breaks, I'd doodle on napkins, using muscle memory to keep my skills alive. The 6-month review approached. Tessa's lawyer issued a report detailing my compliance. Consistent employment, stable housing, therapy attendance, adherence to all requirements. The conservatorship would undoubtedly last indefinitely. Professor Lennox sent a message through. A student. He'd seen my paintings in a small exhibition before everything happened. A curator was interested, but I couldn't create new pieces. I couldn't access my old ones. Couldn't even afford supplies. Another door closed under Tessa's control. Jade Summers reached out once. She'd been where I was. Took her 5 years. To truly rebuild, her advice? Comply. Document everything. And wait until Tessa makes a mistake. They always do eventually. But I'd already seen how Tessa's mistakes were irrelevant when she controlled the narrative. After 4 months at the call center, I was promoted to supervisor. The raise meant nothing since Tessa controlled the money, but it looked good to the court as evidence of my stabilization under her supervision. Some evenings, I'd sit in my small room, doing the math, at minimum wage, with Tessa in charge. Of everything, I'd never save enough to legally challenge the conservatorship. The system was designed to be unbreakable once you were in it. 6 months passed and another court date arrived. Tessa wore the same navy suit. She presented evidence of my progress. The judge acknowledged my compliance and extended the conservatorship for another year. Tessa hugged me afterward. I stood stiffly, arms at my sides. That night, I found a message slid under my boarding house door. Emily, Tessa's roommate, was moving out. She couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She'd saved screenshots of Tessa's messages from the game. She was playing with me, but screenshots weren't enough. We both knew it. I continued the routine: work, therapy, compliance. Tessa had fully secured the trust fund she wanted, the control she sought, and the narrative she'd crafted. I existed now as a supporting character in her success story, the troubled sibling she'd rescued. A year passed, another review, another extension. The therapist stated I still showed resistance to accepting help. Tessa proposed increased sessions. The judge agreed. More of my wages were siphoned off for unnecessary treatments. Wes sent a wedding invitation. He'd completely rebuilt his life in another city. I couldn't go. Tessa needed to approve the trip. But seeing his success reminded me of something I'd lost. Confirmation that life existed beyond Tessa's reach. And boarding house tenants changed often. The stories were always the same. People trapped by systems meant to help, but twisted to control. We were all living proof that the truth doesn't always matter when you can't afford to prove it. Tessa made her first major mistake after 2 years. She posted on Instagram about a luxury shopping spree while I was wearing thrift store finds. Someone who'd followed the blog recognized her and mentioned the trust fund. She quickly deleted it, but the screenshots spread. The court didn't care. Social media drama wasn't indicative of financial wrongdoing. Tessa's lawyer spun it as her maintaining a professional image while managing my care. The judge reassured me that gratitude would aid my recovery. I learned to comply while maintaining internal resistance. I smiled during therapy, thanked Tessa for her help in court. I played the rescued sister, documenting everything, hiding notes. Maybe one day they'd matter, maybe not. The call center closed after 3 years. Tessa found me another minimum wage job within days. This time, data entry numbers on a screen all day. She called it progress, building my resume. I called it existing without living. My 28th birthday went unacknowledged. Tessa managed the trust fund, and it grew. She delivered quarterly reports showing that the money meant for my art career was now sitting in investments I couldn't touch. Some blog followers occasionally contacted me. They'd formed their own forums to discuss conservatorship abuse. My experience had become a cautionary tale. How planning and influence could turn family relationships into legal traps. Tessa got engaged to a senior partner at her firm. She asked me to be a bridesmaid. The therapist explained that refusing would show I hadn't dealt with my bitterness. I stood at her wedding in a dress she chose, smiling for photos to represent our repaired relationship. The reception was at the same hotel where our parents had hosted her internship party years earlier. Full circle. Tessa gave a speech about family, forgiveness, and growth. The guests applauded. I clapped too, the sound hollow in my ears. After 4 years, the judge suggested reducing oversight rather than ending the conservatorship, just loosening the limits. Tessa agreed magnanimously. I could open my own bank account with a $500 maximum. Small freedoms that felt like a mockery. I started saving those meager amounts, $20 here, $30 there. Tessa wouldn't think to look for hidden funds. Not enough to fight legally, but enough to dream of escape. The boarding house manager, who'd heard too many stories like mine, pretended not to notice. Tessa gave birth to her first child after 5 years. She named her Rowan, after me, a bizarre honor that made my stomach churn. She brought the baby to court reviews, saying she wanted to set a good example for her daughter. The judge praised her devotion to family. A real Rowan, me, continued to exist on the fringes of Tessa's life, working jobs she approved, living where she allowed, spending money she controlled. The perfect example of someone who needs conservatorship because the system forced me to be. Some evenings, I'd fantasize about the painting career I'd abandoned. Tessa had sold or stored my portfolio pieces, the acceptance letter revoked. Before that Thanksgiving dinner, I was building my life. But dreams were all I had left, and even those felt monitored. After 6 years, the therapist retired. Tessa chose her replacement, another professional who saw what they were paid to see, mastered the rhythm by then. Nod, agree, express. Gratitude, perform recovery while dying inside. Wes sent sporadic updates. He had 2 kids. He'd started his own business, living proof that Tessa's victims could heal if they entirely escaped her orbit. But the conservatorship held me fixed in place, like a satellite circling her success. 7 years passed. Tessa managed the trust fund, which had grown. She'd used some for her own profit, administrative fees, management expenses, and emergency loans that never had to be repaid. All permissible under conservatorship law. Everything documented in reports the court never questioned. I turned 32 in that same boarding house room, living the same low-wage existence. Therapy was still mandated, the same controlled life. Tessa had won so completely that fighting felt futile. She'd seized my 20s, my aspirations, and my freedom in exchange for money I hadn't even known existed. The blog about our story became scholarly material. Law students studied it as an example of conservatorship abuse. Psychologists examined the family dynamics. But I remained locked in the case study, living the cautionary tale in real time. Tessa's second child was another daughter. She posted about teaching kids financial responsibility and the value of family support. The comments praised her wisdom. Nobody remembered the blog anymore. Tessa's meticulous narrative had buried the truth for years. After 8 years, I stopped looking for change. I accepted this was my new life: work, therapy, compliance. Tessa had built a prison of legal paperwork and court orders for the trust fund she'd stolen legally, not forcefully. Existence was shaped by mechanisms designed to protect her. But I kept logging every encounter, financial report, and therapy session. Boxes of notes hidden in the boarding house basement. Not because I thought they'd matter, but because documentation had become my only source of agency. Tessa had taught me that lesson too well to abandon. The other blog victims had mostly moved on, new places, new lives, sometimes new names. But I remained the one who fought back and lost everything in the process. A stark illustration of what happens when you tell the truth in a system that rewards manipulation. My phone vibrated one evening, an unknown number. Jade Summers. After all this time, she'd become a lawyer specializing in conservatorships. She'd been following my situation. She couldn't make any promises, but she wanted to help, to fight, because she'd been where I was. I met her at a coffee shop near the boarding house. She looked sharp, confident, accomplished. Tessa had tried to take everything from her, but she'd rebuilt it all. Jade studied my documentation, took notes, asked thoughtful questions. For the first time in 8 years, someone trusted me without agenda or demand. Jade filed a motion to challenge the conservatorship's duration. Years was longer than any appropriate intervention. She argued that continued control was abuse, not support. Tessa's lawyer countered with standard arguments about the ongoing need for oversight. The hearing was set for my 33rd birthday. 9 years had passed since that Thanksgiving dinner. Tessa's control had lasted 9 years. 9 years of merely existing. Jade planned meticulously, but we both understood the odds. The system protected itself. Tessa entered court in yet another expensive suit. She'd aged well. Success had suited her. I wore thrift store clothes, looking worn down by 9 years of controlled poverty. The optics alone favored her argument. But Jade found something in the financial records. Small discrepancies. Administrative fees that didn't match standard rates. Loans that aligned with Tessa's major purchases. Not enough for criminal charges, but enough to raise questions about fiduciary responsibility. The judge listened differently this time. 9 years was too long for any conservatorship without significant mental illness. The financial questions raised doubts. Tessa's lawyer brought up procedural issues, but the seed was planted. The review was extended for further investigation. 3 months of more hearings followed. Tessa's money management was scrutinized. My compliance was documented. The trust fund's original purpose was examined. Grandma wanted to help whoever needed it most. Tessa had ensured I needed it before taking it. The final hearing was in December. 9 years and 1 month after Thanksgiving, the judge ended the conservatorship. No admission of wrongdoing, no compensation for wasted years, just the ability to control my own life again. Administrative charges continued to drain the trust money. Tessa kept whatever she'd taken. I walked out of the courthouse into the unfamiliar cold air. Air was free. Jade hugged me, then handed me a business card for a victim advocacy group. I have resources for rebuilding, support groups, job training programs. The difficult path back to something resembling a life. Tessa waited by her car in the parking lot. We stood 10 feet apart. The restraining order had long expired, but the distance between us remained. She said she hoped I did well. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She had won the money. I had won my freedom. We had both lost everything that truly mattered. I returned to the boarding house one last time. I packed my few belongings. I retrieved my hidden documentation. I said goodbye to the manager who'd shown me small acts of kindness. Someone else, escaping or trapped, would fill the room within days. The victim advocacy group helped me find temporary housing, a real apartment, small, basic, but mine. I could lock the door, choose my own food, spend money without permission. Freedoms that felt foreign after 9 years. I found work at a nonprofit helping victims of conservatorship abuse. The minimum wage was still the same, but it felt more significant now. My documentation helped others build their cases. My experience became expertise. Tessa had created the perfect victim, but victims can become advocates. 6 months after gaining freedom, a package arrived. My old portfolio pieces. Professor Lennox had saved them before his relocation, kept safe for 9 years. Water damaged, old, but mine. I scattered them across my apartment floor and cried for the first time since the conservatorship began. Started making art again. I bought supplies with my own money, made time on my own schedule. The skills had faded but weren't gone. My new work was darker, inspired by loss, but still mine. Tessa couldn't take this. 1 year after my liberation, I had a gallery show, a small venue. Sales were modest, but my name was on the wall. My art in frames, my story told through visuals, not legal documents. Some pieces sold to people who'd read the blog years ago, full circle, yet entirely different. Mom reached out after seeing the show notice. She wanted to reconcile, to explain, to find peace. I didn't respond. Some bridges were completely burned, beyond repair. She'd chosen Tessa's narrative over mine. That choice had consequences. Tessa's life continued to thrive. Was promoted to partner, perfect family, beautiful home. The trust money had helped her achieve her ideal life. But sometimes I wondered if she ever considered the cost. Probably not. Predators rarely do. Was building slowly. One minimum wage check at a time, one artwork at a time, one day of freedom at a time. She'd taken my 20s and early 30s. The rest was mine, to reclaim. Academics studying financial abuse republished the blog. New victims found it. I reached out. They shared their stories. We built survivor networks. Tessa had taught me about documentation. Now I was teaching others. Her weapons became our tools. 2 years after gaining independence, I met someone. At a survivor support group who'd also escaped conservatorship, we recognized each other's triggers. Anxiety about money, document hoarding, the craving for control after years without it. Trauma bonding turned into a genuine relationship. We moved in together after a year, shared expenses, shared documentation practices, a shared understanding that family could be the greatest threat. We built our relationship cautiously, knowing how easily trust could be weaponized. Tessa had taught us both that lesson. My art shifted from processing trauma to exploring recovery. Critics called it raw, honest, unsettling. It sold enough to supplement my nonprofit salary, not the career I'd envisioned at 22, but one I'd earned through sheer survival. Tessa sent me a message for my 35th birthday, something about putting the past behind us and being sisters again. Her daughters would love to see their aunt. I blocked the number. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged. It just had to be survived. The conservatorship had ended 3 years ago, but its effects lingered. Ruined credit, a derailed career, shattered relationships, postponed dreams. But I was free, building, creating, living on my own terms. Tessa had won the game she was playing, but it was over. Life moved on. I continued working for the nonprofit, promoted to case manager, then program coordinator. After years, my pay finally surpassed minimum wage. The American dream had been delayed, battered, but not broken. My partner and I got married at City Hall, no family invited. Our chosen witnesses were fellow survivors. We celebrated at the cafe where I first met Jade Summers. Small joy, but a genuine one. Tessa couldn't touch it. The trust fund had paid for Tessa's life and legal bills, but I'd learned money wasn't Grandma's only legacy. She'd also left me stubbornness, resilience, the ability to document everything. Tessa couldn't steal those gifts. I ran into Emily, Tessa's former roommate, 5 years after gaining my freedom. She looked haunted. She apologized again for not doing more. I told her I understood. We were all just trying to stay out of Tessa's grasp. Some escaped, some didn't. My artwork started selling to people who admired survival stories, not famous, not rich, but sustainable. I could afford supplies, pay rent, save a little, and build the life Tessa had tried to prevent slower than expected, but mine. The nonprofit grew. It helped dozens escape conservatorship abuse. Sometimes, like mine, families misused protective systems. Others were different, but equally trapped. Each win was small, but significant. Tessa had created an advocate through her mistreatment. Sometimes I thought about her. What kind of person spends years planning to ruin their sister? What did she tell her daughters about their missing aunt? Did she ever feel guilty, or did success justify everything? Questions without answers. Predators rarely self-reflect. Story became a teaching tool. Law schools invited me to speak about conservatorship reform. I presented my documentation. I explained the tactics. We warned about family predators hiding behind concern. Some students took notes. Others looked uncomfortable, recognizing dynamics in their own homes. 7 years after independence, I achieved something Tessa couldn't take. Peace, not forgiveness, not forgetting, but acceptance. Some people prefer destruction. That I had survived her worst, created something from nothing, found beauty out of anguish. That was my victory. Gentrification claimed another shelter when the boarding house where I used to live closed. I helped relocate residents, recognizing myself in their controlled poverty. Some were escaping conservatorships. Others had different traps. Everyone needed what I had needed, someone who believed them. My partner and I bought a small house. Nothing fancy. It needed work, but it was ours. Mortgage approval felt surreal after years of financial restriction. We painted the walls in colors Tessa would have called wasteful. Filled rooms with art she'd have deemed unnecessary. We created a home she couldn't touch. 10 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, I finally felt like myself. Changed, scarred, but truly mine. Tessa stole a decade, but not my life. The girl who took the fall in 2019 was gone. The woman who survived remained. I still document everything. Old habits die hard. Boxes of receipts filed, key conversations. Recorded, screenshots stored in triplicate. Tessa had taught me vigilance. Now it protected me, not her. The ultimate irony arrived in a letter from a lawyer. Grandma's inheritance had one more asset, a painting she'd created, stored in a cousin's attic. Worth little money but left expressly for me. It's the grandchild who needs it most. To Rowan by name. Tessa couldn't touch it. I hung Grandma's painting in my home office. Its abstract swirls of color reminded me of my own work. Tessa couldn't sever that connection. An inheritance beyond money. Proof that some things can withstand even the most deliberate destruction. My life at 35 was nothing like I'd envisioned at 22. No prestigious art career, no traditional success. But I had freedom. Love, purpose, things Tessa couldn't measure or control. She'd won her game, but I'd gotten my life back. Sometimes young artists contact me after finding my work online. They notice the gap in my resume. Years gone. Tell them the truth. Sometimes family is the greatest threat. Success isn't always linear, and survival is its own art form, Tessa. Remains in my past. A lesson learned through pain. A reminder that trust requires verification. A ghost haunting family events I no longer attend.